Welcome back to the Brydge Club podcast. This is your host, Ruffin. Today I'm chatting with Erin Levine, the co-founder and CEO of Hello Divorce, a venture-backed platform that seamlessly blends self-service software with specialized services to make divorce a kinder, simpler, and more positive experience. The average divorce today costs $15,000 per person and takes 12 to 18 months. 79% of consumers can't even afford an attorney. Hello Divorce costs a tenth the typical amount, and users complete divorce in 1/3 of the time. Prior to Hello Divorce, Erin built her own family law practice and brings over 15 years of experience in the space. Current investors in Hello Divorce include the Artemis Fund and Alumni Ventures. Loved chatting with Erin and can't wait to share her story with you. So let's jump right in. So before starting Hello Divorce, you built your own law practice specializing in divorce and other family matters. So can you take us back to the beginning of your journey? Why, one, did you want to practice this type of law? And
Sure,
how did you
absolutely.
start your own
I
law
definitely
practice?
did not grow up thinking that I was going to be a family law attorney. It wasn't one of those things that was on my mind. But what inspired me to pursue a career in family law was actually my own experience with the law. So as a late teen, I was a witness in a criminal matter and a plaintiff in a civil lawsuit against my own abuser, my gymnastics coach. I was an elite gymnast, and unfortunately, my coaches were very, very abusive. And while I obtained justice in the traditional sense of the word, he went to prison. He helped pay for my law school education. The whole experience within the legal system was disempowering, triggering, really, really hard to follow, never quite understood the strategy, low, if not no tech. And that piqued my interest in the law. I thought, I want to help people who don't ordinarily have contact with the legal system navigate through a really big life challenge and come out feeling empowered for it. So family law was kind of a great step for me to take. These are people who never or very rarely connect with the law and now have to go through a massive life transition that has a huge legal component. And then starting my law firm was kind of the natural progression. I worked for some very, very traditional lawyers who were great mentors in that they taught me how to practice law, but they were either unwilling or unable to really push the envelope. And I was ready to do that. And I had the entrepreneurship bug, always have. So I opened my law practice in the San Francisco Bay Area in 2009. And for the next, 15 years, really worked hard to build it. At one point, we had just about 13 lawyers before I scaled it way back to found Hello Divorce.
What were some of the typical cases that you dealt with your law practice? And was divorce like the main thing, or were you also, working in different spaces?
I had some wild cases. Divorce was definitely a very big component, child custody, child support. At the time, though, I was also doing probate, so estate distribution. And I can think of one client in particular. I thought this was going to be one of the easiest cases of my career. I had just opened my law practice, and this was a brother of a man who had passed away. That man had no children, was unmarried. All I had to do was make sure that his assets got to my client, the brother. And just as we were getting ready to close the estate, we found out that the deceased had actually been murdered, and his boyfriend had assumed his identity and stole most of his money.
What?
So he had to, yeah. So there was like this huge police investigation. They ultimately were able to recover him and get back a lot of this money. And then finally, we were going to distribute it to my client. And then the police handed over some of the evidence they had collected during the investigation, and there was a will. And the will was handwritten and left the estate to another guy he had met in Bali like 15 years earlier. So
that's insane. This could turn into a true crime podcast if we dug much deeper into that story.
It really could. It really could. But it was, I mean, that is the part of family law that I enjoyed. I mean, not seeing anyone murdered or their identity assumed, but just problem solving and, again, helping people kind of navigate through really big life stuff.
So how did you go from the law firm building it up, deciding to scale it down, and then identifying the opportunity for Hello Divorce?
Yeah, scaling it down was terrifying. I didn't completely give it up at first, but I certainly scaled it down. I had to have some income coming in. I had two daughters. One was a brand new baby. So I scaled it way back and first just started working with a development firm to interview hundreds and hundreds of people who had either recently been through divorce, were getting divorced, or were thinking about divorce. And the reason being is because I really needed to understand the customer journey. As lawyers, we're taught to win and win at all costs. That's how we prove our value. Most of us weren't taught to be customer centric. And that was a big leap and a big shift I had to take. And the reason why I was so ultimately excited to build something new is actually, there's a couple reasons for it. One is that a lot of people don't know that 75% of divorces, so 75% of divorces have at least one party who doesn't have an attorney.
Wow.
So imagine going through like a big deal like divorce. There's financial implications. There's implications to how you parent, when you parent. This is a big deal. And people were doing it largely on their own. The second big issue is that for people who did have the money to hire a lawyer, on average, it was costing them $15,000 to $20,000 just in fees and taking them 12 to 18 months. So it wasn't the best way to start out your next chapter when you're deep in debt from paying all these fees and really worn out and exhausted from the process. And the third big issue was that as lawyers, we kind of bully the process, and we have to, right? We have to get people focused on their legal rights and ensure that they're well protected and try to optimize their outcome. But divorce is so much more. And anyone who I knew who had gone through the process were thinking about a lot of other things besides law. They were thinking about co-parenting, changing their insurance plans. How were they going to keep the house or not? And I really wanted to create a holistic platform that addressed far more than the law.
What are some of the common threads between a divorce? Because I imagine like every case is like, there's so many different things that could be happening case by case, but I also imagine there are some common threads, and that's part of probably why you are able to build Hello Divorce.
That's right. So yes and no. I don't think I realized at all how hard it would be. And one of the reasons why it is so hard is because the legal process is different, not only from state to state, but sometimes counties as well. So no one had ever really attempted to automate the process in every state, and that clearly has been challenging. But you're right. There are some threads that exist in almost every divorce. And so we looked at what are the problems that need to be solved, and in order to automate what is very common there, and what are the primary emotions that drive divorce. Overwhelm, shame, and guilt. And the reason why I spent so much time on that and fear is because how you feel during your divorce process is almost as important as what the product does. So if you're angry and you're resentful and you're scared, you can't possibly make decisions that facilitate an agreement. Instead, you're really focused on everything that went wrong in the past instead of how do I move this forward and create a better next chapter. And so emotion became a really important thread that we had to take into account and develop for. And then there's more logistical things that happens in every divorce. You have to disclose your finances. you have to start with an initial document that has the divorce begin. You have to come to an agreement or have a court order on, if you have kids, child custody and child support, otherwise property, debt, and spousal support, whether there will be any, and if so, who will pay, how long, and how much.
So walk us through kind of how the platform works today and like how you bring your customers or clients through those different facets of divorce.
Sure. So what a lot of people don't realize is that when people contact a lawyer, it's usually when they are, well, almost always ready, when they are ready to divorce, right? They are ready to take that next step. You don't call a lawyer and pay for a lawyer to think through the decision, to think about what might happen, to go over your emotions. Like that would be way too expensive. So a very different thing from a lawyer experience or a purely lawyer-led experience versus Hello Divorce is that a lot of people are coming to our platform 2 to 3 years even before they file for divorce. They are trying to understand what might happen if they get divorced. A lot of them are trying to save their marriage. They are considering what this might look like. They're trying to imagine life if they were to separate. It's a very, very considered decision. So a lot of people initially come for our webinars, our content, sometimes to meet maybe with one of our life coaches to sort of process what's going on in their lives and whether this is the right decision for them. Then in order to begin the process, people generally choose a plan. So the plans range from $400 to $3,800. And really, you decide what plan you want based on the amount of help you want and the complexity of your divorce. And by complexity, I mean your estate, how complex your assets are, but then also how complex your interpersonal relationship is with your soon-to-be ex. So if you have a very basic divorce, everything is pretty amicable, you might choose our $400 option, which is a DIY divorce, completely, software-based, all the way up to $3,800, which includes 5 hours with a mediator who will either meet with both of you or maybe even caucus, meet with you separately to broker a deal, but help with that final stage. So there's, a pretty big range. And this ends up being about 90% cheaper than if you were to go out on the open market and work with a lawyer of your choosing. In addition to the plan, in addition to that transaction, that is going to help you not only complete all of your forms, do all your financial calculations, and handle all the filing and dealing with the court for you. We also have additional products and services that about 35% of our customers take us up on. One, for example, is you can meet with a lawyer, but instead of paying a huge retainer, you might meet with them for 30 minutes or an hour just to review your final paperwork before you sign. You might choose to work with a certified divorce financial analyst to help ensure that you're dividing your assets in a way that's going to set you up for resiliency, not cause tax problems, that kind of thing. You might want to meet with one of our partners who can help you determine how to divide home equity in a way that's fair, but also doesn't cost too much money. Once you're within the process, you have a lot of support that's kind of curated to help you address any of these problems. But the vast majority of people start with a plan, or they sort of toe dip and they start with our marital settlement agreement generator, which is simply a software that's $100 that allows them to walk through all the issues that are going to come up in their divorce and detail how they would like to see them resolved.
Before Hello Divorce, with your law practice, what was the most expensive or drawn out divorce you ever saw?
There were a lot. I would like to think that myself and my attorneys are well-intentioned, that we wanted to have a divorce that is solution focused. The problem is that the system itself is set up for fighting. It's set up to ramp up conflict, not help sort it out. So a lot of divorces never even had a chance of getting to a quick resolution, because the minute their spouse received that form that says you are being sued, the minute that third-party process servers showed up at their employment or while they were at home eating dinner, the minute they saw on the paperwork plaintiff versus defendant or petitioner versus respondent, it ramps up this fear where people go out and the other spouse might hire the most aggressive attorney in town. Yeah. And so the real goal with Hello Divorce is to help people opt out of the system altogether so they don't get caught up in that. But as far as, the most expensive divorce we had, it was just shy of $300,000 in attorney's fees.
On one side or between both sides?
Yeah, that was on one side. That was on one side. It was insane down to the last moment when we were in trial, because trial and discovery is what really makes things super expensive. And what surprises a lot of people is only 3 to 5% of divorces actually go to trial.
Do most of the Hello Divorce cases, they don't go to trial, or do some of them go to trial?
Correct. Yeah. If they ultimately go to trial, we can't represent them. We don't actually represent. We can help them find somebody who might be a good fit for them. But yes, the 3 to 5% of the population doesn't go to trial. Less than 1% of our customers end up having to litigate their divorce in a trial.
So obviously divorce can be very expensive. Amazing that you guys are making it so much more affordable. Insane that 75% of people are not represented. I believe that's what you said earlier. That is truly crazy. I guess going back to when people are young and getting married, what are some things that couples should be thinking about in terms of like, how can I protect myself if this does end in divorce?
All right. So I can tell you that, throughout all of my career, so now being a lawyer for 20 years, exclusively in the family law space, I not only have done divorces, but I've done a lot of prenups, a lot of postnups, a lot of help and counseling throughout an entire journey. And what I see is that the strongest relationships by far are the relationships when couples are willing to talk about finances, when they are an actual partnership. Now, that doesn't mean that the division of labor when it comes to finances is equal. There are just going to be a lot more men who tend to be more comfortable talking about and managing finances. And in some cases, that's okay. Like as long as you're empowered and you understand, but you really need to be a partner and help make the big decisions. That goes so far. I think what we're seeing with divorce is that it used to be that when people got divorced, it was always because of some big reason. In fact, it was the only reason you could get divorced, if there was adultery or abuse. And now the vast majority of people are coming to us and they're saying that may have happened. Like it might have been the straw that broke the camel's back, but not usually. What it was is just this feeling like we're two people that are very different living together, kind of like roommates. A lot of resentment over decisions that maybe one spouse made without considering the other, just feeling really lonely in relationship. And there's nothing worse than that. The other big piece of advice is that in some states, they have what's called covenant marriage. And if you see that, please run as far away as you possibly can.
What states is that typically?
Okay, so Louisiana, Arizona, Arkansas is another one too. So you can opt into it if you want. And what it is it says that, none of this no fault stuff. If things don't work out, we want to be tied to each other unless we can prove, which is very, very hard to do, abuse, adultery, something like that. We will agree to a 2-year separation before we file for divorce, no matter what the circumstances are. We'll agree to premarital counseling, which is fine. That's wonderful for a lot of people, sometimes pre-divorce counseling too, but I just don't want my state to tell me that I have to do it.
Totally.
A lot of people don't know, and they think it's like this extra special commitment that they're making. Like, we don't want it to be easy to divorce. It is never easy. Divorce is never easy, no matter what. It is a very, very challenging, emotionally, legally, financially experience. Nobody comes out unscathed. It's hard enough. We don't need to make it even harder. So run away from that. If you want some rules regarding what divorce might look like, that is your perfect opportunity for a prenup.
Now I'm curious how many people in the States are married under the covenant marriage each year, and I'm going to Google that after.
Okay, so you'll have to tell me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but the reason why I bring it up now is because a few people have come to us recently.
Oh, wow.
And I had never heard of it in California. Of course, we're slowly learning, not slowly, pretty quickly learning laws across the country. And they had said they were, we noticed they were in covenant marriages, and we're like, what is that? Is that common law marriage? No, it is like serious. Like, yeah.
Wow. Learned something very new today. Very interesting. On the topic of prenup and postnups, can you, one, help people understand like what goes into each of those? And then what is like, I think we can infer what the actual difference is, but is there like a significant difference if you do it before or after getting married? And then also, do you guys offer that, or will that be a future product?
Yeah, we don't offer prenups. We do offer postnups. The biggest difference with postnups is they're much easier to create and enforce because the state, your court, assumes that you're on the same negotiating platform. Like, you don't have to enter a postnup. No one can force you to enter into a postnup. And so it's easier to enforce, and it's usually a lot less expensive. I often see postnups for trial separations. Maybe one party has a substance abuse issue or a mental health issue that is really, really maybe not being treated and really serious. And so the other party wants to stay married, but they also want to limit their risk if their spouse is to go out and gamble away money or get in an accident or something like that. I also see postnups when one spouse is more risk adverse. You don't know everything about your spouse when you get married. And once you get married, you say one spouse might want to try some wild and crazy business idea, like found a startup. And in that case, sometimes the other or both want to make sure that they protect assets against creditors and things like that. And then sometimes you do postnups for estate planning. So if the two of you are creating a will or a trust, and you are making assets that at least at one time were separate and you want to make them into joint assets or vice versa, then a postnup is really important. Prenups are harder in that in almost every state they do require, and if they don't, you really should, to make it enforceable, have lawyers review and certify. So stand up, write in that they their clients do in fact understand all the terms, that they're in a good headspace, that they want to execute this contract. That's really important. So having both people represented is important. If you work with a lawyer, lawyers take on a ton of liability. When lawyers take on that liability, you're paying them often not just for the cost and the expertise of them preparing the prenup, but at the same time, the liability that they take on, there's usually a premium tacked on for that.
What are prenups challenged on in court?
That I didn't understand a term, or I was forced into signing it, that it's unconscionable now, such a legal word, right? But let me give you an example. So, and I do love prenups. I think prenups can be a really useful tool for both spouses. Even if one spouse is coming into the marriage with no assets and the other one is super wealthy from family or their own business pursuits as we get, married later on in life, I think it can be a really helpful tool to give people certainty. This is what likely would happen if we get divorced, and to negotiate a reasonable resolution. If somebody has all separate property assets that they're bringing into the marriage, the likelihood that if you get divorced that you'll get any of that is slim to none. But with a prenup, you can actually use it as a tool to ensure that you do get something, especially when your spouse is giving up the opportunity to build a joint estate because they already have separate stuff going on. For example, in California, you might enter into a term that says under no circumstances would spousal support ever be awarded. And if you get divorced And if something drastic has happened, like maybe one spouse has chosen, or they together have chosen for that spouse to stay home with the children and not work or pursue a career, maybe they had to move to another state to ensure that their spouse's career, advanced, maybe they're now disabled. But if there is circumstances that would just be completely unfair, completely unconscionable, in certain circumstances, you can challenge that.
And are postnups not as challengeable?
Postnups are harder to challenge.
Okay.
Like they are, as long as you follow the rules in your state, which is usually that you both sign off on it, you date it, you don't put anything in the agreement that you're not allowed to contract about, they are presumed to be enforceable because you signed them after you got married. They sometimes are challenged, but a lot less.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so you mentioned you guys are operating in a number of different states, I believe 14 states today. Would be curious to hear a little bit about your go-to-market strategy. Like, what did you launch in one state or a few states? And then how have you expanded across the country? And what have been some of the biggest challenges? Maybe like, what was the hardest state?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. The hardest state, I'll start there, has probably been Utah.
Okay.
Which sounds wild, especially because the divorce market is so much smaller there compared to like our big states that we really excel at: California, New York, Texas. We're in 14 states, but we offer like national products and services, and we are expanding like all the time. Utah's been really hard. I think there's just culturally, what we've seen a lot of is spouses needing or wanting to make the other spouse wrong. Like they did something and I need to save face, and show the reason why I'm getting divorced. It's not just because this isn't working, but because they did something wrong. That leads to a lot of fighting. Similar to what I was talking about earlier when you get caught in the legal process, which means it is a lot harder to keep people within this somewhat amicable process. Like we understand there's going to be conflict and the spouses do work asynchronously, but even so, it has been really challenging, and their state rules and their forms are always changing, sometimes without any warning. So Utah's been tricky. As far as state expansion, there's no magic wand. I really wish there was. It takes about 6 to 9 months to ramp up in each new state. So we balance the geographic expansion with the vertical expansion, meaning because we know each state that we enter into is going to take a little while to ramp up, we also want to make sure that we're figuring out what we can bring in to extend the LTV to continue to solve problems for our existing clients in states that we serve. So our full service divorce offering is in about 64% of the country. And we have been, up until this point, primarily business to consumer. Our biggest channels have been SEO, surprise, surprise. My co-founder, Heather, was employee number, I think 2 or 3 at Best Reviews, and she scaled content there to $190 million exit. So like she knows content, but also like informational structuring and really balancing that empathy piece with the authority piece. So SEO, big one for us. Organic, Instagram, and Pinterest. A lot of our customers are 35 to 44, right? So while I would love to, and I hope to at some point, get amazing at TikTok, in the moment, we're, a lot of our focus has been on organic Instagram, where we, get a lot of clicks and a lot of contacts. So lots of different publishers, lots of different ways that we bring in customers on the B2C angle. And right now we are leaning into a B2B distribution strategy. So think employee benefits. We have a partnership with one of the largest family law firms in the country, if not the largest one, so that they can send us leads for people who can't afford a lawyer or don't want to work with a lawyer, but really focusing on predictable revenue streams and ensuring that, we can meet more people's needs quicker.
What can you share? Like what types of employers who might be initial partners, or maybe too early to discuss that?
We're currently in negotiation right now. But what I can tell you is that, employers that are very large, that are interested or already have wellness benefits. To a certain extent, some of them even offer legal insurance benefits, but you can imagine how expensive it is to offer employees a certain amount of hours with a lawyer. And you can also imagine how frustrating it is for employees when they're not able to get their divorce done in that 2 or 5 or 10 hour window. And so this is an opportunity to say, hey, even if someone's going to hire a lawyer, they still need to do 30 plus forms. They still need to do these financial calculations. They need to file them correctly with the court, serve them and deliver them at correct intervals. They need to know when you need an e-signature versus an original signature, all of those things that we provide. It's kind of a great opportunity for us to get in there.
And I imagine a huge win for employers, because something like a divorce would be wildly distracting for an employee, if I could imagine.
Oh, there's some really amazing stats on the decrease in work productivity. Not just because I got to go to a hearing, I've got to meet with my lawyer, but when you have we all know somebody who's been caught up in an awful, angry, miserable divorce, and it affects everybody in your life, especially kids. And that is one of the biggest reasons why we're trying to take down the acrimony, the tension, all of that kind of stuff, because we want kids in the center, not caught in the middle. And we want people to be able to continue to pursue their careers. That being said, it is so normal that you are showing up at work and you're in a total fog and trying to figure out, how am I still doing this? No matter what, divorce is going to be hard. Just trying to make it, a lot easier on people, a lot more structure, give people a lot more control.
Yeah. And I imagine things like your life coaches are great added asset to folks when they're going through this. So very cool to see that all packaged together.
Thank you.
How big is the divorce market? How many people in the US are getting divorced each year? What's the typical age range? I know you mentioned most of your customers are 35 to 44, but is that, generally where most people are getting divorced?
Most of our customers are within that age range. It's a lot younger in states like Utah, even Texas, and Colorado. Colorado is also a really complicated state to get divorced. In terms of the median age, it's right in that 35 to 44 range, about 7 to 13 years of marriage. And 2 million people get divorced every year. And then there's about 16 million or so that are kind of struggling with post-divorce issues that they need to resolve. So we really focus on that core market, the 2 million that are getting divorced. And it's been staying pretty sort of you can pretty much predict that it's been that way. And then there's also times of the year. Divorce can be kind of seasonal, which was really surprising to me. Q4, for example, is not the biggest quarter for divorce sales, but it is by far the most important time for us to get out there and do education, webinars, master classes, downloads, calculators, all of that kind of thing.
When are the typical high seasons for divorce?
Definitely right around tax time. So when people have refunds, it's often when they're filing, because it's not just our fees, but there's state filing fees too. And most people don't qualify for a fee waiver. And if you do, it's just an awful experience. So in New York, if you can't afford the few $100 filing fee because you've got major expenses and life, you have to qualify for, quote, poor person status.
What qualifies you?
You have to be way below the poverty line. It's really hard to qualify. And it's just an awful process, to apply to be considered poor. It's really awful. It's just a terrible process.
That sounds awful. Okay, shifting gears a little bit. So you've raised $5 million from investors, including the Artemis Fund and Alumni Ventures. Would love to hear, I imagine for Hello Divorce was your first time fundraising from venture capitalists. Would love to hear a little bit around your learnings or best strategies from raising VC dollars.
Okay, so we've actually raised, it might not be anywhere, but we've raised 6.25. We've done
Amazing.
thank you, our pre-seed and our seed. We are now hopefully wrapping up very soon a safe. I think you would consider it seed plus, with the goal of raising an A next year. I was fortunate in that I bootstrapped for a while as Hello Divorce was sort of a side hustle to see if I could be successful, get clients all the way through their divorce, have a decent margin, and get the legal industry's buy-in, because I certainly didn't want to launch something and spend the next 20 years in lawsuits. So, so during that time, I did a lot of research on investors and not investors in particular, like anyone in particular, but the model. Was it likely to work for my business? Was it something that I wanted to pursue? So by the time I decided to raise capital, I felt really ready for it, or at least I thought I was really ready. But there's a lot of imposter syndrome, right? You never know what to expect. And what I find is, as much as I love our investors and as wonderful as they have been with strategy and support and introductions, which is a big reason why I took investor money, right? Because I needed those intros. I needed access to people that I didn't grow up around. But also at the same time, they're very oftentimes really swayed by what's happening in the market. And so if you're sticking with a strategy that maybe isn't what's happening in the larger market, or isn't as exciting as AI or last season crypto, it's really challenging. It's really challenging. A lot of judgment, a lot of expectations that somehow you'll be able to wrap those things into your business model. And you have to stay really, really vigilant. And a lot of times, investors, we think of their words as the words of God, oh, if they say that we need to do this, we need to do it. Many times that's not what they want at all. A lot of the time, it's really, they just want to be the devil's advocate. They just want to help us figure out strategy. They just want to make sure that we've thought of these things and that we aren't sort of making hasty decisions. I think probably the most important thing that we've done, and this was with Duncan, our other co-founder, is that he has been so militant about us keeping a really, really clear CRM. And it's not using any fancy software, we're using Google Sheets, but every time we have a meeting with an investor, no matter who it is, there is feedback that we put in the sheet. What is it that they want to see? What is it that they have concerns about? And that's been really helpful, because when Artemis funded our seed round, we built that relationship in pre-seed, and they said, here is what we need to see in order to invest in you. And so I got to come back a year later and say, you asked for X, Y, and Z, and here it is. I have X and I have Y. I don't have Z, but here's why. And it was, really, really helpful.
That was all amazing advice. Would love to dig
Thank
in
you.
a little bit more, because I think this is maybe not a conversation that's had enough. When you were trying to decide if venture capital would even be right for your business, I guess, what were some of those really things that you were thinking about then?
I had to think about, a lot of it was lifestyle, what kind of life I want to live. I have, like I said, 2 kids, I'm married. How much time was I willing to invest? Did I want this to be able to support me and us? Or did I really want to make massive impact? Did I think that people might try to replicate? And if so, I felt I'm going to have to move very quick, and I'm going to need money for that. what are the things and the skills that I don't have, and how important are they to my business? Because if they are super important, I'm probably going to need some money to be able to hire for it. Like, not everybody's going to give their time, for free all the time. So, so like, what is it that's going to make my business successful, and how quickly do I want to grow it? And what is the end game? Like, I want to change the way family law is done in this country. I think it's barbaric. The system was built at a time when divorce was illegal at worst. It was immoral at best, and it hasn't changed much since then. So it needs to be completely disrupted. And that's when I was like, all right, we're going to do this. I wish I had learned more about, like, what does a board entail, and what are the expectations, and how to best manage. I still have my Startup CEO book on my shelf that I refer to all the time. I think it's easy to get distracted by the noise. Like, there is, Y Combinator, TechCrunch, like all these different resources, and everyone's sending them to you, and you feel like you need to read everything. And I feel like, that just find what you connect with most, one or two great resources, and stick with those. When you feel up to it, you go to a founders event, or you go to a seminar and you learn a little bit more, but you can't possibly read and do everything.
Yeah. Wait, when was divorce made legal?
Oh gosh. I don't know off the top of my head. It was really interesting though. They used to have these divorce camps in Nevada where women from all over, when divorce became accessible, would come to. At the time, Nevada had no residency requirements, and they'd like all stay there and cook for each other and hang out and get divorced. But I think what really changed, there's one thing that has really changed in divorce, and thank God, and you have probably heard some of this rhetoric trying to roll it back in the news lately, but that's when Ronald Reagan, of all people, signed no-fault divorce into California state law in 1970, and then all 50 states at some point thereafter established some form of no-fault divorce. And what that did was reduce dramatically female suicide rates and domestic violence occurrences. We still have a massive problem with it, but when we allowed women to leave their marriages without having to prove that their abuser actually abused them, it really paved the way for what I thought was going to be a ton of reform. There really hasn't been much since then, but at least we have no-fault divorce.
In the interest of time, I'm going to start to wrap things up. Can you share a female founder, investor, or leader who inspires you, and a little bit about why?
Sure. I love Kimberly Bennett. Her company is Fidu, Fidu. And what I love so much about her and her platform is she is taking on the legal billable hour. So it's a platform that helps lawyers offer subscription-based platform or pricing and flat fees, which we all want. Like, none of us want to wonder what our bill is going to look like at the end of the month. So it is amazing, but she has to convince lawyers every day that they should leave this billable model that is entrenched in, how we, run the world. Like, it's a golden goose of a revenue stream for lawyers when they bill by 0.16 every 6-minute increments. And she has to convince them that it's going to make their life better as lawyers. It's going to give them more flexibility. It's going to take a lot of pressure off. It's going to provide ongoing income, even when they're not necessarily working as hard hours as they were on other cases. And it's going to make the customer's life better, but that's all an uphill battle. And she walks the talk, she gives back to her community, and she herself has a subscription-based law firm. So
amazing. I'm like terrified to ask a lawyer anything because I don't want to know what the bill would be. So I am going to check out her practice. Thank you for highlighting
Me too. And just a reminder, if you're asking anything on ChatGPT, remember, ask for the source, because oftentimes
Yes.
it's wrong, and then check the source.
Okay.
But it can be really helpful, at least managing your expectations a little bit about like what to expect.
And then finally, where can everyone find you, and where can they find Hello Divorce and all of the amazing resources you guys provide?
Great. So hellodivorce.com. If you are thinking about divorce or are in divorce or know somebody, I'd strongly encourage you to click on the homepage for a free 15-minute call. We can just talk through where you're at and how we can help. On Instagram and everywhere else, we're at Hello Divorce. And you can reach me by email or on LinkedIn. My email address is Erin, ERIN, at hellodivorce.com.
Amazing. Well, Erin, thank you so much for joining the show. Loved learning so much about your background and what you're building at Hello Divorce.
Thanks so much. Thanks for chatting about divorce for a little while. I appreciate it.